Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our first installment of the Better Breeder or Better Bulldog Bureau's Breeder Spotlight. We started this board or group about 10 months ago, and we always dreamed of creating this type of content for the people who visit here. Today, we have Maggie Shook from Gunslinger Kennels. We appreciate her stepping up. We asked her about 2 weeks ago, and without hesitation, she accepted our offer. And I think that speaks volumes of her confidence in not only herself, but also her dogs and her program. And our goal is to highlight breeders who are breeding better bulldogs, and that's definitely the case here. We'll give some people some time to go ahead and get in the group and also start viewing this live session before we get started. Of course, you're able to go back and watch it later if you missed the beginning. And I think we have a very comprehensive group of questions today that'll really give you some insight into Maggie, how she started, and her progression through to where she is now. So just to start off and give you a little information about Maggie. Maggie grew up in Atlanta and then went on to Davidson University, where she got a degree in religion as well as anthropology. She's married to Richard Shook, and together they have a dog training business that she manages. We know that means that she does more than Richard probably. And they have a daughter together named Annabelle. They live in North Carolina on a small hobby farm and with tons of animals. And she now has the program Gunslinger Kennels. Her husband is a Schützen judge, which, by the way, congratulations. I think that was new news that he just became a judge. He also has his own kennel called From the Southland of German Shepherds that he shows, titles, trains. And so a very cohesive family unit that is got a lot of dog action going on. So growing up in Atlanta, I can't imagine that you grew up on a hobby farm. And so tell us, did you have any pets growing up?
We did. We always had a dog. My dad liked Cocker Spaniels, so we always had a Cocker Spaniel or two floating around. We had a mutt for a while, but he ended up having to go live on a farm, which actually he did go live on a farm. It wasn't the usual, colloquialism for he had to go. Had some border collies and had all sorts of other types of pets, but it was definitely not a hobby farm type of situation. It was, right in the suburbs, went to private school, that kind of thing. So where we are now is a big change from how I grew up.
Nice, nice. And so when was it that you realized what an American Bulldog was, found out about them? When was that? Was that before going to college? Was it during college, after college?
It was actually right after I graduated. I ended up living down in Charlotte, and I adopted a male mixed breed dog, and he really did look like a boxer pit bull kind of mix, but somebody one day said he looked like an American Bulldog, and I had no idea what that was. And this was about 2000. So, get on the internet, start looking around, and I see these amazing animals doing all sorts of different working and things, like, from the protection sport to hog catching and shows and just all these things that were just blew my mind that I'd never seen before. And I just fell in love with it. And I spent the next probably just 2-3 years researching and just reading boards and basically just gathering information. And then
correct. And I think that totally gives us a time perspective. We came in the breed at similar times, and of course you're reading stories from the different boards, and you're hearing that some people were on pen and paper sending letters to the breeder and waiting for those letters to be returned, and getting VHS to watch. And when we came in, the internet was a lot friendlier. people were using it more. And I remember going and finding the ABRA site, and there was just a list of hundreds of breeders on there and going down and looking. And so I think that totally gives a perspective of the time, our age, and how things were. And so at that time, when you were looking, like, what was your ideal dog? What were you looking for in an American Bulldog?
I was definitely more drawn to probably a more standard type dog, just because of the workability. I've always liked a bigger American Bulldog also. I don't like the smaller, fine bone, standard type dogs. I like the big, substantial ones, but that also have that wind. So when I came into it, I wasn't really looking towards the bully side of things. I was looking more towards the standard ring.
Go ahead and tell us a bit about your start, and we'll expand upon that a little bit. Like, when you got started, you got your first dog, and who was your first dog, and what kennel did you get that dog from?
You know, it's funny. There's a guy about 30 minutes from where I live named Brian Cram, and he had a couple of dogs from different places, and he went to the shows, and he had a really nice dog named Cool Hand Luke. And so I kept an eye on him, but he didn't really have any breedings. And then one day I was randomly looking through, this was back when the classifieds in the paper were basically a lot of the places where you looked for dogs, and there was a litter of American Bulldogs in there. Ended up calling them, and it was actually a litter out of that male that I'd been looking at. So just out of curiosity, I went to go see him, and it was a big, usual litter of Bulldogs. There were like 12 of them, and they just were roaming around these people's front yard, not closed in at all. And I fell in love with one of them, but I wasn't quite ready to pull the trigger. So gave it a day or two and thought about it, and then went back and ended up buying it. And it's one of those, fate stories back in the day where you could go buy a $500 Bulldog and it turned out to be this, monster that goes on to be Schutzen 3 at 8 years old. So that was my start. I got him, and he wasn't a show dog. He's about 105 pounds. He's lanky, and he did not enjoy the show ring. He was a bit, he was a lot of dog to handle. He was a lot for a first-time Bulldog owner, and it took a good number of years for him to settle down. But he was an awesome dog, and he's pretty much what I base a lot of what I do in my current program on what kind of dog he was.
Exactly. Now, with him, how did you go about choosing that dog at that time? Like, what made you choose him?
He basically came, like, all the puppies were running around, wrestling, being puppies, not paying a bit of attention. And he was this big old puppy, and he came up to me and just sat in front of me and stared at me in the face for the entire time I was there. So it was like, well, in retrospect, people say, oh, your puppy chooses you, and we don't really follow that because it usually just means it's the wild puppy that wants to bite everybody. But he showed me at the time that he has that focus, and he just, he wants somebody to be with and to do things with. And he wants a relationship, which is down the road, I realize now, is a really, really important part of what we do.
Right. Now, going and picking out this first dog, did you have goals in mind at that time? Or was that something that you developed later on?
I actually went to my first show. I picked him up in August, I believe it was. And then Art Parker's Summer Sizzler, or whichever one that was, it's in September, that's always hotter than blue blazes down in Richburg, South Carolina, was the following month. So I took him down there, and he was just old enough to show. So that was our first show experience, me with my new puppy at that really hot show. And we did it well. We were third place out of 3 dogs in the show ring, but what are you going to do? We were both.
Yeah. Yes, I believe I've been at that show site before and shown, I think it was like a cow pasture, or there was some kind of pasture in a hill, but I've been to Art and Mary's show, and maybe on down the road, it'd be a great content to use, is maybe have Art and Mary on, if that would be possible, and we'll see as that happens. But so you got this first dog, and had you gone to a show already, or was it getting a dog and then you went to a show?
It was basically getting the dog to going to the show.
Right. And how, starting out showing, did it progress to then working? Because at the show, maybe you saw people working, or did you have in mind that you were going to work this dog?
I had in mind that I was going to work this dog, but at the same time, you know, watching, I think it was Parker Barnett and I believe his dog Hooch there, saw him working on Yohani, and it just blew my mind, you know, the dog, the drive and the control. And I just, you know, I wanted to do that. And then watching, you know, the hardest hitting and the driviest puppy, you know, just that further interested me in the breed and made me want to really get involved and have a dog that could do those things.
Now with Roland, when you took him to a show, I still remember going to the Heart of Dixie and having some dogs ringside and when they were working, and our dogs just completely going bananas when the work started and whip started cracking. Was it kind of like an experience like that with Roland? That did he have it right from the beginning? Did he show interest in the work from the get-go?
You know, I didn't put him in anything that show. It was the next show, probably the next June. I took him out there and had Yohani working because he would be working dogs while the show was going on. And as soon as that whip cracked, it was on. You know, I have pictures of him from that session. There was a photographer there taking pictures. And, you know, I didn't have the right harness on him or anything like that. But he was, I mean, it was there from the get-go.
Nice, nice. Now we're taking a bit of time to talk about Roland, and it's great because very few people get their first dog to turn out to get that first dog that they use heavily in their program, but he's become a pretty important piece to your program to the point where you've done some line breedings on him. And I would just like to go ahead and show everybody on the screen here a little bit about Roland, and bear with me as we kind of navigate through some of this. So here's a picture of Roland, Gunslinger's Roland of Gilead. I don't know if I said that right.
Yep.
This is incredible. And the reason why I feel it is so incredible, like I said, I'm learning through and going through this, is Gunslinger's Roland of Gilead. A Schutzen 3, these SD titles, are those NWDA titles?
Yes, they're like Schutzen titles. It's very similar, obedience and protection with a few other things thrown in. There's just no tracking involved.
Okay, okay. But for somebody to go out and get their very first dog and take it to a Schutzen 3, that is incredible. There's not many bulldogs who compete at the Schutzen 3 level, even title on the Schutzen 3 level, but to do it with their very first dog not only talks volumes about Maggie as an owner and trainer, but also the dog. And it wasn't until we started doing some work with dogs, and we have no extensive working history like somebody like Maggie and many others in the breed, but we learned so much about our dogs. So being able to take your first dog to this level, I can't even imagine how much knowledge you gained along the way in the training of this dog. And so not only did he have his Schutzen 3, he had these sport dog titles, his BST, and then a 12-mile AD and a BH. And that is absolutely incredible. And now I'd like to scroll down here. Maggie had talked about the dog Cool Hand Luke, and here's Cool Hand Luke. And for my own, as I was putting this together and looking at some of your dogs, at the time, the only dogs that I recognized were these Lickhart dogs back here, Thunderstruck and Lizzie. And then when I looked at the bottom side of this pedigree, I don't even recognize any of these dogs. And so this is what I find fascinating, is that sometimes we get so caught up in what we're doing and the dogs that we have, that we don't pay attention to another person's program and am aware. So I just found this interesting to learn about these dogs. And thank you for being able to tell us about them today.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you have to go back and Roland's pedigree on the bottom before even any recognizable kennel names come up. And then you'll see like some Dixie War Dog stuff and some old Allen stuff. So
exactly. And so I know a lot of people are like me today, where they're literally learning about these dogs for the first time. And so that's what I love, is providing new content and having people learn information. So again, I can't thank you enough for doing this with us today. At what point did you go ahead and decide to breed American Bulldogs?
It took a while. I got rolling in 2003. He didn't end up being the show dog I wanted, so I ended up purchasing a female from Eddie Knowles in 2004, and that was Xana. And she was a really nicely put together moving dog. She had the pigment problems that you'll see a lot of times coming from down there, the lack of pigment around the eyes. But other than that, she was a real fireball. For a second bulldog, she was a handful too, but it was for different reasons. She had pretty high dog aggression to her. But she was actually a really, really good catch dog. And it broke my heart because at that time, as she was maturing, was the time when the catch comps at the shows were ending, when all the, HSUS stuff and all the legal stuff was blowing up. So we really missed her window of, her true calling, because she was hell on wheels on a hog. So I've got her in 2004, showed her to a champion. Then in the beginning of 2007, after, everybody had been health tested and she championed out, I decided, I obviously made the plans late 2006. I got up with Don Matthews down at Confederate Kennels and bred to his male Fatback. And my decision behind that, skipping ahead a little bit to, the talking about mentors and stuff, but it was Ariel Diaz and George Diaz gave me some really good advice early on in looking at the mother line, paying more attention to the mother line than the father line, and doing breedings a lot of the time. So I researched her maternal grandmother, Emma, and decided to do a line breeding on that. And Fatback was actually an Emma son. So my first litter was a line breeding on the old Emma dog that Don had.
Nice. I remember the dog Fatback going to the shows. Mm-hmm. And if I remember correctly, he was what seemed to be a little, having a standard pedigree, but being a little more hybrid bullion type, like performance bullion type. Just a great, great looking dog.
I believe he showed in the bully ring. And that litter produced, I kept 3 puppies from that litter. A little female named Pumpkin, a bigger standard type female named Detta, and a big standard male named Bubba. And unfortunately, I chose not to breed Detta, which I regret to this day. I probably should have bred her at least once just to see. And then when we went and bred Bubba, I think he was 5 at the time. I mean, he was a champion in UKC, a grand champion in NKC, and bunches of working titles, and he was sterile. So that was heartbreaking. But we bred Pumpkin 3 times, and that ended up being 2 of those litters were with Boyd's Alaskan Blizzard. And that ended up being a really important breeding for the future of the program.
What was Pumpkin's registered name again?
She was Gunslinger's Divided Girl.
That's it. And I was always a huge fan of her, and I remember seeing her out at the shows as well. And then she had a daughter named Riza that I was also a big fan of. Now, when you were having your first litter, how did you go about evaluating? We talked about how you evaluated Roland, what interested you in that specific dog. How did you evaluate your own litter?
When you do your first litters and you're trying, you have all these ideas of things you want to do. I did the early neurological stimulation stuff. I obviously spent a lot of time with the puppies because I did. It was my first litter. I had them in my office. I extensively tested them and went over stuff with them. But I looked at Prey Drive, looked at all this stuff. Bubba was my first pick. I wanted a standard type male. So that, I had some males in the litter that were a little more hybrid, going towards, their father and stuff like that. And then Detta was a big old standard female and really, really pretty. And so I picked her. And then, Pumpkin was kind of an afterthought. She was this little round-headed puppy, but she was just, personality just everywhere. And I just ended up keeping her kind of last minute. And obviously it was one of those, fates align luck things again. She just ended up being everything I could ask for.
Along the way, and obviously you progress now. Has the way you evaluated pups changed over time, or has it stayed pretty much the same?
It's changed. I mean, I've been working with the same pedigrees and the same blood so much, from my perspective, it's either going to be there or it's not. I've picked puppies who've had insane prey drive and will chase a flirt pole all day or little alligators, but then they mature and there's nothing there, or you pick, like when I picked out Roman, he, prey drive wasn't much. He was a little hesitant in situations, but he looked like Roland. He looked like my stuff. And so, I've gotten to the point where I have the luxury of keeping puppies and letting them grow up and see what they turn into. I have the luxury of time and being able to let them mature, and it's either there or it's not.
So thankful that you mentioned that, because obviously this wasn't a question I had planned, but so are you saying that you were able to kind of choose dogs off phenotype because they represented the family line, and you were felt that you were going to get a consistent type dog because of the way they looked from their phenotype?
It seems to work out that way sometimes.
I love it. And I totally agree with you on that fact. And it seems like if a dog resembles a certain line or a certain part of the pedigree so much that it exhibits it through its phenotype, I believe it's not like a 50-50 percentage. You have the blood percentage, 50% mom, 50% dad. But if it's closely resembling its mom, I feel it's exhibiting more of its mother's traits than that 50% of the blood would represent. Mm-hmm. And I really feel that phenotype is a very valuable tool as well to consider when evaluating the dog. So I love hearing that. Now, going ahead and evaluating your dogs, you obviously have tested them extensively. I mean, this goes beyond what the typical bulldog breeder tests and evaluate. I mean, you are truly a percentage of a percent, and truly a 1%er in the breed, and maybe even rarer than that. Having done all that testing, you mentioned that, early on, your first litter, one of your pups was sterile, but are there any issues that were present in the dogs that you at that time were able to almost like diagnose or pinpoint, and things that you've worked on?
Well, as I mentioned, the pigment issue. So that would, apparently the pigment around the eye, the lack of that is a pretty strong gene. So we've had to really keep an eye on making sure the pigment comes back in, because that will, if you keep a puppy that doesn't have all that pigment, it just carries on. Health-wise, we've been pretty lucky over the years. We obviously test hips and elbows. We do a lot more these days, because of the genetic tests that are also available. But we've been pretty consistent producing dogs with good, hips and elbows and knees and that kind of thing. So, we've worked on the pigments. Sometimes my dogs can be a little straight stifled in the rear, so we have to keep an eye on that also. But at the same time, I have my own opinions on those things, being that, Roman, who's my put on a pedestal dog right now, he's everything I could have ever asked for in a bulldog. And he's straight in the rear, but he is probably the most explosively fast, powerful dog that I've ever had. So,
Absolutely. And, looking at your dogs and being familiar with a few of the outcrosses, it seems like that rear maybe came across from the bully blood from the outcross, going back behind even Blizzard and those dogs. Would you agree with that?
To a certain extent, yeah. Xana was a little straight in the rear also, so that came back through the Roscoe, bred to the Emma daughter. And also that's where the pigment issue came from. But yeah, definitely, Blizzard, we used to joke he had no ass at all, but other than that, being a super dog. So you just got to keep an eye on making sure we choose, breeding dogs that are well balanced, as opposed to, a little heavier up in the front and lacking in the rear.
Absolutely. The question and how it was going to progress was, problems that you pinpointed early on, and maybe problems that you're working on today. Maybe they were different. Anything different from the beginning? You've probably gotten pickier along the way, but it's probably more along your evaluation, and what you want. You're dealing with a healthier stock than what most bully breeders are, and I would say a larger percentage of this board is bully breeders. Mm-hmm. And so you're not necessarily dealing with the same issues that we're dealing with.
Yeah,
and, so
we don't have wind issues or heat stroke issues. And going back along the way, I used to have more dogs that were just family only. Obviously I can handle them in the show ring, but it's not like I could hand somebody a leash and they wouldn't think about maybe taking a chunk out of them or something like that. But that seems to have, like, right now, I think the only dog that I wouldn't trust, handing off to, he's actually pretty fine these days, is Padre. He was a bit of a jackass when he was younger, but Roman can go out and be a monster on the field, and I literally come right off the field, drop the sleeve, and strange people can hug him pretty much. So it's nice not to have to worry about the sharper temperaments anymore, but at the same time, I don't mind a dog that's family only. It's just, I have a strong appreciation for both types, but at this point, I'm really sick of a dog like pulling on the leash, and a dog with dog aggression trying to get other dogs, and just being a little more relaxed and not necessarily having to worry about other people just coming over, and maybe not everybody has the best etiquette when approaching your dog. Yeah. And so I've had dogs that the wrong people probably would have a bad outcome with, and then dogs that I don't have to worry about it whatsoever. What makes a dog a cull, in your opinion? Obviously puppies when they're born, if there's an obvious health issue that's going to impact life later on. Temperament would probably be the biggest one as they grow up. I won't put up with any sort of handler aggression, and I'm not talking about, I've got strong males that if I'm unfair on them, they're going to have something to say about it, and we all just have to chill for a minute. Now, I don't consider that handler aggression. The ones that, you go and you try to choke them off a tug and they turn around on you, are the ones that get in a kennel fight and you got to break it up and they turn around on you. That, you're done. That's it. You're not breathing anymore. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Now, what makes a dog or a puppy a gunslinger keeper? Like, what are you looking for?
It depends. I like to go out there. I like to see confident puppies. I like to see litters that you drop on the ground and they're just balls to the wall immediately. The litter Ginger came from, Daywalker, her litter with Padre was like that. Most of them are like that. So I like to see that. I don't necessarily, all litters develop differently. I've whelped enough and raised enough Bulldog litters at this point to know that sometimes, you prefer to see that, but sometimes you're going to take a litter out for the first time and they're going to be like, oh my God, and, be worried. But then you take them out 3 days later and they're running around like lunatics. So, I tell people all the time, don't just wash a litter of puppies out at 6 weeks old because they're worried. You just got to give them a little bit of time, and, hopefully they come out of it. Most of the time they do. And if they don't, then you have a problem. But, you give them a week or two, and if they've moved on and changed, it's just puppies developing.
Yes. And I notice even when pups are getting moved out and maybe going to a home, maybe keeping back a pup with its sibling no longer there, I see them bloom and emerge as well. Yeah. At that time, just by having a litter mate gone. And transitioning over a little bit to your family, when and how did you meet Richard?
It's kind of a funny story. We were both in different relationships at the time. We met in 2007. I had gone down to Chris Thompson's Low Country American Bulldog Expo, and it was that Friday. I was running Roland for his AD, and it was rainy and it was kind of chilly, and he was sitting on the golf cart with Chris while Chris judged it. And then we didn't really get introduced then, but he likes to laugh because he looked at Chris and said, "I don't think that big old bulldog's going to make 12 miles."
Right.
He didn't know me and he didn't know Roland at that point, but Roland actually made it. And later that weekend, I'd been looking for someone new to train with because I kind of reached the end of the road of what I could accomplish with the trainer I was using before. And so I know Becky Blevins was one of the people who introduced me to him, but it was then at the end of 2007 that we began training together. And then, it wasn't till the middle of 2009 that we actually started seeing each other as a couple.
Did Richard ever own ABs?
He didn't, but he had been involved in the American Bulldog world just through his friendship with Chris. He went to shows and he was involved with the working American Bulldogs. He had Kahili here for a while for training before we were ever together. And he actually put the one on Blizzard for Chris.
Okay. I think it's key to have a significant other that also enjoys bulldogs.
Yeah.
I see so many unsuccessful relationships and just problems that come up in marriages and with relationships in general because not both people are involved with the bulldogs. And if that's the case, I believe that you don't have an understanding and it can wreak havoc on a relationship. So that's awesome that both of you guys obviously are involved in the breed, involved with and able to help each other out. I mean, he's obviously a trainer, decoy, owns a business, and you guys are able to reach goals together.
Yeah, I think it helps. He loves American Bulldogs too. He'll all the time tell people, my wife has the best Bulldogs and I have good German Shepherds. And I think it also helps relationship wise that we do have separate breeds. The Bulldogs are the house dogs, but I make the decisions for Gunslinger Kennels and he helps me with that. And he makes the decisions for German Shepherds and I help him with that. And, we collaborate a lot, but we aren't competitive with each other within the same breed or even against each other with our separate breeds. So
what dog would you say is Richard's favorite of your program?
He really loved Roland. It was an experience for both of us because he'd had a lot of training beforehand. I'm not going to say it was great training, but we didn't start training for Schutz until he was 6 years old. So it was a project for our new relationship to get him to Schutz 3. Over the years, we've had, house dog females that he's had special bonds with, like Pumpkin and then Lily. And I know right now, Roman's a big favorite of his. He just always says he wish he wasn't quite so angry in the bite work. Wish he was a little bit sportier, but I kind of like him like that. I like to go out with a dog that, is going to bring the battle every time. But, he's definitely had a few little favorites throughout the years.
So with Richard coming from a different breed, coming from a different background, did he have any different points of view or differing philosophies that you have incorporated?
We have similar views on health testing and breeding stock. He has, more experience with, looking at things. He has German Shepherds. So there's a lot of guidelines in Germany about breeding German Shepherds and rules and all this sort of thing. And it's nothing that I think is ever applicable, and I would not want it applicable to American Bulldogs. But there are things you can learn from them. The line breeding is a lot different than back, a few years ago. It was okay to breed on a 2-3 or a 3-2, which is pretty much as close as I'll go. I'm not the type of breeder who's going to breed, at least not at this given time, siblings and mother or son and stuff like that. So, it was just interesting learning about the restrictions on breeding. Like now it's even stricter. You can't breed 2 3s and 3 2s and register them in Germany anymore. It has to be further back. And then, you know, the discussions about what, you know, once you go past a certain generation in a pedigree, it really doesn't matter anymore. Like, you know, Bulldog people will talk about, well, these dogs were in the 10th generation, blah, blah, blah. Well, the Germans look at it and say, you know, nothing past the 5th generation really makes any difference on the dog you're looking at in front of you. So it's interesting in that direction, because I don't usually spend a whole lot of time looking at, you know, the generations way back there. You know, you more look at the dogs right in front of you in the first couple of generations for me.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was something I wasn't familiar with, is the German side of breeding. And of course, having the German Shepherd and, you know, background, I'm sure that made you privy to that information. Obviously, in Bulldogs, you see a lot of people who are willing to go ahead and inbreed and take that risk. But I totally agree with you, and I find that very interesting. Staying with the topic of just your family a little bit, tell us about your family. Like, you have a 8-year-old daughter, Annabelle?
Yes.
And does she love the dogs as well?
She does. You know, I was trialing and showing the entire time I was pregnant with her. And, you know, I had 2 litters on the ground when I had her. So we came home from the hospital and just went right back at it, you know, sat down on the couch with this newborn little baby and, you know, 2 bulldogs on either side of me. And none of them ever, you know, blinked an eye at it. They just kind of accepted her coming in as, you know, as a new part of the family. And she's been involved with it, you know, since the get-go. You know, now it's kind of, she used to be in the whelping box with me all the time, and now it's kind of, you know, old hat, you know, other puppies being born, but, you know, she knows what's supposed to happen. You know, she's always been around when we've done breedings, you know, not so much anymore because she's, you know, almost 9, a little more independent, but, you know, she knows a whole lot about, you know, dogs and where puppies come from and that sort of thing. And she knows a lot about training dogs and dog behavior. So, you know, she's just been immersed in it, and we don't force her, you know, to do anything. You know, I know some people make, you know, their kids do a whole lot of chores with the dogs, but I don't do that, because I feel like, you know, it's my job to take care of all this stuff, and I don't want to, you know, squash any passion that she might have for it moving forward by making it a chore. And now she's getting old enough to start, you know, not quite old enough to train her own dog yet, but she's old enough to handle a dog that's been trained. So she's trialed Richard's old female Maggie. We call her Maggie GSD, for a tracking title. So it's fun to watch her go out there and learn how to handle the dog and talk to the judge, and, you know, and mature, and hopefully within the next couple of years she can actually have the, you know, presence to train a German Shepherd or a, you know, a more low-key Bulldog.
You know, I think those are great tips of how to keep your kid involved, keep your kid interested. You know, we choose to have dogs ourselves. It's not really up to our kids to clean up, you know, the yard, anything like that. That's something that we do. The extent for us has been, you know, now they have a dog that sleeps with them individually, that they, you know, kind of chosen. And beyond that, my kids are like 12 and 9. So here in the future, they are very interested in taking on more and starting to do some work with them. So that's something that I will definitely be probably picking your brain about and asking for some help here in the future. What are some interests outside of Bulldogs that you have?
We're both obviously, you know, we joke that we grew up in families that didn't let us have all the pets and animals that we wanted. So now neither one of us says no when one of us says, hey, I'm going to get 3 sheep. And we're like, oh, go for it. So, you know, we have the hobby farm. We have sheep, cows, and pigs that we raise for meat. And I have a small flock of turkeys that I've been breeding this year. And I recently got into snakes, which is kind of, I don't know, I wanted to do back when I was a teenager and I didn't get to. So now I'm, you know, 42. So who's going to stop me? You know, I can have a snake if I want to. So, most of our hobbies involve other types of animals, and we just like to mess with that sort of thing. Richard has racing pigeons, so he and Annabelle train them to race, and they belong to a local club, and they'll go to the meetings. And later this year, I think it's the fall, the young bird season will start, and they'll be racing the young birds again. So, you know, I garden and can and stuff like that, and you know, I cook a lot. So we're kind of homebodies, and it's kind of having all this stuff going on here has made it, I don't want to say worse, but you know, it's hard to take big trips when you have everything going on around here. But you know, we still go to the dog shows together when we can, but sometimes these days we have to go separately. And that's another thing Annabelle loves about it. She loves to go to dog shows and just hang out. And if I have a puppy she can show, she's all about that.
Well, I am definitely envious, and I got to say that Annabelle sounds like she's going to be a very well-rounded kid. Now, just take us through a normal day in your life, like from the time you get up to the time you retire in the evening, just to give people an idea of what it truly is to be a bulldog breeder.
It is a lot of work. I know we hadn't gone over it yet, but I have, at the moment, we have 35 bulldogs, and I've retired a whole bunch of bulldogs over the past 2 years, mainly from my first generations of breeding. So that's about 15 spayed and neutered retired dogs. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we live in town on about half an acre. And then we have 13 acres outside of town where the farm and the training field are. So in the morning, Richard's up and gone, usually before I'm even up. And I'm up, you know, 6:30 or so. And then kennels and turnout and everything takes about 2 hours, give or take, you know, whether they're puppies around, obviously that takes longer, and what age they are. And then, you know, got all the other animals to take care of. So basically it's from the time I get up to the time I make it out to training, it's probably 3 hours. So, you know, then I'm out training around 9:30 or 10. And in the morning, I usually do obedience with whatever dogs I'm working with, which right now, my main focus is Roman. We're still working towards our 3. He has IGP 1 and 2. He trialed for, I can never remember what it's called. It used to be an APR, but it's basically the 3 without tracking. So he did that this past fall, I guess, before everything shut down. And then his son, Legion, is my next in line. He's working on his 1 right now. And then I have a young, big bully puppy I have. He's not really a puppy anymore. He's about 18 months old. He's working for a BH. So I do obedience with them and sometimes piddle with a few other little dogs here and there. And then after that's over with, before lunch, I usually run the dogs because our 13 acres is surrounded by a bunch of woods and farmland. So I'll take 1 or 2, maybe 3 of them that I can trust off leash. And then I exercise and they exercise through the fields and the dirt road and driveway and all that for probably another, you know, 45 minutes or to an hour or so, and then take care of my turkeys out there. And then I keep, you know, anywhere between 6 and 8 dogs out at the property. So, you know, I have to care for those also. And then we head back to the house. And, you know, these days, since the kids aren't in school anymore, you know, fit in taking care of Annabelle and everything that goes on. And she comes out to training with us every day, obviously, and then rides her bike and runs around. Come home for lunch, then Richard heads back out to the field. And he's out there from, you know, before sunup most days till sundown. And then a lot of days I go back out in the afternoon, you know, after I do my second turnout of the day, go back out in the afternoon and do protection work with whatever dogs I'm training at that time, and then come home in the evening. And then obviously it's evening turnout time and feeding and taking care of puppies if they're puppies here. And then we usually eat together for dinner, but some nights I cook alone for the both of us. So after Annabelle goes to bed, we don't usually get to eat dinner until about 9 or so. And then we might be on the couch by 9:30 if we're lucky, you know, depending upon what other craziness is going on in the world.
You know, that is a ton of dedication, and it speaks volumes because, you know, people often wonder what is the correct amount of dogs, how many dogs is right. And I don't think there is a real answer to that other than the amount of dogs that you can adequately take care of. And, you know, there's so many people who have numerous amount of dogs, and you see them come out and you can tell that they haven't been socialized, that they haven't had time spent with them. But in your situation, your dogs are NKC 2012, 2015, 2017, 2018 Dog of the Year. You are working your dogs, titling your dogs, and you're doing it right and creating a great example. And again, it's just further validation of why we're speaking with you today. And so that's very, very impressive.
Thank you.
We just a couple of the questions you answered in that one, so that's great. Moving on down the list here, what are the age range of dogs in your kennel? You talk, and just expanding a little bit on before, as far as retiring your dogs, you were talking about spaying and stuff, and I saw that you on your website list some of your old dogs being available. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
If I have a dog that's just a social butterfly and would love to go sit on anybody's couch, I'll put them up for adoption. But you have to be so picky, and it worries me so much sending older bulldogs out there, just because I've heard horror stories and stupid stuff happens. And if I find the right home for certain dogs, I will adopt them out, obviously spayed and neutered. Most of my females have at the most 4 litters, and that's most of them have 2 or 3 and then retire. I mean, I have a big yard, so it's not like I'm breeding every female back to back to back, because it'd just be a ridiculous amount of bulldog puppies, and it would just be too much. So I know some people like to do all their litters back to back with a female and then retire her. I'm more of the I might breed her 1 year, and then it might be 2 more years before I breed her again. So most of them will have their last litter around 6 or 7 years old, and then I just go ahead and spay them, just to avoid any worries about accidental breedings or pyometra or anything like that. And then the males, I don't necessarily neuter them unless I'm going to adopt them out if they're older. But I've had a couple, like I had one with a prostate issue, so I had to neuter him. And then Padre ended up having a perineal hernia, which I'd never run across before. So I unfortunately had to neuter him and retire him for most of his work. But I would rather, it does add on to the dogs that are here that I have to take care of every day, but I know they're happy. I know they're eating from gold. They have good nutrition. They run around the yard. We take care of any medical issues that pop up. I keep them out of trouble, which bulldogs will naturally find a way to get into trouble. But right now, our oldest dog is Riza, and she's 10 and a half. We lost Tally last year, and she was 10 and a half also. And then our youngest is Sally. We call her Psycho Sally. She is 4 months old right now, and she is, let me see, she's obviously a line breeding on Roland, but she's also a line breeding on the Pumpkin Blizzard litters that I did. So Rise is in there, who's from the first one, and Jeremy's in there as her grandfather on the father's side through Polar Bear from the second litter. And she's a handful. So we're ranging from 10 and a half years down to 4 months at the moment. But we have a big population between 10 and 8 right now.
I agree with you. And going back to what you talked about, giving females some time off between litters, I find it advantageous because you're able to evaluate the litter, and the dog that you maybe had in your head or in mind for them for their next breeding, because of the results you had from the previous litter, it might change your decision when matching them up for the next litter. And I think that anytime you can gather as much information with maybe having 6 months to a year off between a litter, it can only be helpful.
Yep.
So you kind of mentioned this as far as the age ranges. Would you say that 10 and a half, 11 is kind of the life expectancy for your dogs? Is that typical?
It seems pretty typical. Obviously we've lost dogs young for various reasons occasionally, and then we've had dogs go older. But usually you're looking at a 10-year-old bulldog, and mine don't seem old at 10, but it seems like things just happen at a drop of a hat, and you lose them usually someplace between 10 and a little over 11.
Agreed. I find that it's almost abrupt and, you know, it's not really drawn out over time. And so totally agree with that. Um, Going down the list here again, looking at some more questions. Do you freeze any of your studs for future use?
I just started doing that over the past probably 3 or 4 years. I've never actually used any of the frozen. You know, I've shipped it places, but I do keep it stored. Right now, we have, unfortunately, Padre didn't freeze well, so we don't have him, which is a bummer. We have, I need to get Pusher collected again because we had a couple of mishaps collecting him, like hole in the glove and stuff like that, which was a bit disappointing. We have Callahan frozen, we have Roman frozen. I need to take Legion to have him frozen. I do think it's a good idea just to have that back in your head, but I'm one of those people who, you know, if you've done a good job with your program and you're moving forward, sometimes I don't think there's any reason to pull it back from the past and use it again, I guess. But, you know, I can see where there would be instances where it would be helpful. But at the same time, you know, if you put the genetics together correctly and have what you like now, you know, keep on a forward path instead of, you know, keep pulling up the past.
Agreed. At what age did you collect Padre where you found out he didn't freeze well? How old was he probably?
He was older, so that could have been part of the problem.
Like 5, 6, what
Probably 6.
about 6?
Yeah. And, you know, from what they told me, it's just some dogs don't freeze. You know, they collected him and frozen it, and when they went to thaw it was dead. So I don't know. In retrospect, I don't know if something happened on their end or if it was him, but, you know, it didn't work out that way. But I have, you know, 2 of his sons frozen and grandson, so.
Yeah, you know, I've had a couple unfortunate incidents myself, and I was lucky enough to have put semen away on them. And it's not necessarily that I'll even use the dog. It's just I want to have that option down the road to be able to use them if I wanted to. And so with having said that, and hearing about how you feel like if you've done a good job, you're able to move beyond dogs. But is there a dog that you don't have frozen semen on that you wish you did, that you would still use?
It would be interesting to have Roland frozen and then to bring him back to something this many generations down and see how it would affect things. You know, I bred him a number of times and I had, you know, reasonably good success, but it didn't really click breeding him until I bred him to Tally. And Tally, you know, if you look at her pedigree, it's just scatterbred. That's Gunslinger's Talisman of Bells. She was out of Chris Thompson's big old bully dog, Knucklehead. And then my friends in Florida's dog, Angel. And when we did that breeding, it was just, I mean, there are 3 Schutz Untitled dogs in that litter, numerous champions. Oh, there are 2 litters, but that breeding just produced insanely well. So it would be interesting to bring him back down and breed him to something that came through that litter, because I can now line breed on that litter and see what happens. So
yes, a couple things I wanted to say before I forget. This conversation has kind of just jogged my memory a little bit. Rest in peace to King, Sandhills male King that they got from you. 13 years old, impressive. And they also
very long lived.
A big dog. And Sandhills, obviously, they have a ton of experience in the breed as well. And she mentioned that he was a big dog and one of the most athletic dogs that they've ever had. And so it kind of sounds like going back to Roland. Maybe people see that big dog and think that they're not quite as athletic. Maybe they're not going to be able to do the 12-mile AD, and they surprise people.
Yeah, you get those big dogs with all that leg and, you know, a good muzzle, and they're just as athletic. Them, you know, maybe not as fast twitch sometimes as your smaller dogs, but once they get going, it's like a freight train.
Also, I wanted to say a little shout out to Carrie Miller, who bred to Pusher.
That was a
and
beautiful
had
litter.
a very, very nice litter. You know, I obviously lean towards the bully hybrid, athletic bully type. And she got some, along with Mojo's, they got some beautiful, beautiful pups out of
Yeah,
Pusher.
very impressed with that litter.
Super impressed, super impressed. And that, I think, is what's beautiful about the breed, is seeing people who test their offspring, seeing people who are doing different outcrosses and having success, and then having dogs that you're able to use in your program down the line.
Yeah.
So congrats to Carrie for going out, making that decision along with Morgan and Judy, and also just raising a hell of a litter. I love her dogs. She's a great advocate for the breed. Her dogs have been some of the most behaved I've ever seen at any show. And so I know that you're going to be very proud of those Pusher pups, because they're great homes, and she will do great things with them. In retrospect, is there any dog that you bred that today you would not breed, or you wish you had it?
You know, I mean, you look back, if you've bred enough litters and you put enough dogs together and you look at the pedigrees, and there are multiple times you look at them, you think that is going to be an awesome litter, you know, this dog should produce well, and then it's just a disappointment. You know, it just happens, you know. I had an old male named Jim, and coming down the line, you know, he's a beautiful dog, you know, health tested or whatnot, but his temperament was a bit off. And, you know, we played it off. We didn't, we gave him, you know, plenty of chances and stuff. We ended up breeding him. And then I had a few little issues with a couple of his puppies, and I ended up just scrapping the whole thing. You know, we don't breed him. We didn't breed him anymore. We, you know, the puppies, we basically have nothing on the yard out of him. So that was one. And then, you know, then they're just litters that don't work out. You might breed a male to one female, think it's going to be awesome, and then the whole litter is just kind of squirrely for whatever reason the things matched up. So, you know, but, you know, as I tell, this is kind of going into a different kind of topic that I talk about with people who ask me about breeding, is you can't scrap a dog off of one breeding. You know, people say, well, I bred my female to this great stud dog and she didn't produce anything of note. It's like, but you can't base it off of that. You have to try again. You know, you have to do something different. You know, if you really like this dog and you really think you can produce something good for it, you know, try something completely different. You can't just, you know, do one breeding and scrap the whole thing because it didn't turn out like you thought it would.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I think breeding dogs and matching up dogs can be the most rewarding experience when it works out, but it can also be the most humbling experience. I think as breeders, we always have great intentions, and even with the best intentions, you have no idea until pups are on the ground and they start maturing to really know how successful or unsuccessful something has been. And so I totally agree with you there. Now, the flip of that, was there a dog that you bred and upon reflection, you wish you would have bred more?
I wish I'd had the option to breed Jake more. He was the 2012 national champion, and I only had one litter here out of him. I wish I had made it more of a mission to get him bred more, but we lost him, you know, at like 4.5, I think it was. So that was disappointing. And I mentioned before, I had Pumpkin's sister Detta, and I never bred her. She's a beautiful dog and super sweet with the family. She was a little bit squirrely in the head, but you know, it's one of those things. I wish I had taken the chance and bred her just to see, because Pumpkin produced so well. And you just never know what the dog is gonna produce until you take that chance.
Right. And speaking before, you mentioned about Padre and collecting and freezing and accidents, and sometimes accidents just occur. And again, going back to, I think, you know, freezing seeming a little earlier on a stud and maybe not coming across when you're 5 or 6 years in and maybe their sperm counts aren't good or they don't survive the freezing process well, or just a freak accident happens, you can always flush it, but you can never get it afterwards. And so I think that's important for people to hear and think of. One of the things that I love about your program is you haven't necessarily shied away from including, going back to Caleb and his son, Blizzard. You haven't shied away. You've used bully dogs. And not only that, but you produce dogs that almost anybody in the breed, except for somebody who is just looking for an extreme bully dog, they could find that with you. You have a standard type, you have a great hybrid type, and you also have a performance bully type in a sense. And so I love that you have a lot of diversity there. I don't think it's a weakness. I actually think it's a strength. And but going back to the question here, what benefit do you think a bully dog can have for your program?
The bully dogs I've bred to are, there was Ozzy, but you look at his pedigree and it's very standard.
Right.
But you see his phenotype pop up generations down the line. I see a lot of him in Frosty, that big bully, performance male that I'm training right now.
Yes.
Bred to Blizzard, who, part of his pedigree was standard, but the top half obviously was bully. So you see that pop up every once in a while. And then Tally was a knucklehead daughter, and he was just a monster of a bully dog. So you see along the way, I'll have a litter of dogs and you'll be like, oh, there's Knucklehead. You have these little standard puppies and you'll have this one little bully puppy pop up. And I think the benefit is the ones I've bred to, at least, they've had bone, they've had substance. They haven't been extreme. They've had, decent wind to them. They were all workers. So you get that coming into it. A lot of the straight standard programs, some of them don't pay attention to bone and depth of chest and the width and stuff like that. Some of them do a good job at it. And I really like their big standard dogs, but I have no problem breeding to a bully dog. I like the way, a performance bully dog looks, as long as they have, the wind and they have the heat tolerance, which we've had good success keeping that in all of them. And I like, the broader head types. I don't like a weedy muzzle. I don't mind a long muzzle, but I don't want it to be, pointy. I've had dogs, standard type dogs that have had like the kind of the snippy little muzzles like River. Right. Sarah's is, broad, but it's kind of pointed. So it's good to take dogs like that back to a bullier type dog. Like I bred River to Ozzy. And you got really nice boxy standard type heads out of that litter. So I just like it to throw it in there every once in a while for, to keep the different substance in the chest and, the bigger head. I mean, Roland brought all that to the table too, but, he wasn't as thick as some of them. He was more of a tall, longer dog.
Right. I see dogs like Pusher, even though they're a generation removed from Blizzard, that carry that phenotype forward. Would you agree that Pusher, when I see Pusher, that's automatically who I think of as more of the Blizzard type?
Yeah, he's very Blizzard type with more ass to him.
Right.
And then he's also a knucklehead great grandson on the bottom. So you see a little bit of that face in him too. But yeah, he was definitely a throwback in the woodpile of, the bully dogs coming to the top.
Exactly. And what's really cool is to see, I mean, he was bred to a bully female of Carrie's, and obviously she didn't lose type. In fact, she had quite a few bully pups. There might be some that maybe lean towards a hybrid, maybe standard as they mature, but I was really impressed at how bully those puppies were.
Yeah, some really nice heads.
Exactly. What are you most proud of?
Yeah, I've accomplished a lot of things, but it's really something to be proud of when you breed American Bulldogs and you work American Bulldogs and you take a dog that you've bred, Padre. I'm going to use Padre as one of my most proud moments. And you take him to a regional championship, and there were 30 or 40 dogs competing. He's the only Bulldog. The rest were German Shepherds. It was majority German Shepherds, a couple of Malinois, one Doberman, and it's the Schutzen USA Regional Championship. And not only did we pass, we did well. We finished middle of the pack. I mean, we're not on the podium or anything like that, but it was, you taking a completely non-traditional breed and making a very respectable showing at a regional event, in a big venue. It's my first time ever doing it. Obviously his first time ever doing it. And then add to the nerves and stress of it all, on draw night, we were the first pair to go on the first day. So it was a very proud moment to have bred him and to have worked that hard. Richard and I both worked really hard with him, and then to go out there and we put on a show. We did a good job. We represented the breed.
Exactly. With all that you've accomplished, I know that you would never say that yourself, but it's easy from the outside looking in and appreciating your body of work. But with all that you've accomplished, is there still an area for growth and improvement?
There's always area for growth and improvement. And it's just, half of it is just maintaining velocity, and keeping rolling forward with the quality that you've produced. As I said, Roman has he's brought it all together. I mean, his temperament, working wise, he's a show champion, health tests, everything's clear. And, my goal now is, can I produce that again? He's spoiled me. So.
Wanted just to go ahead and bring Roman up so people could see him. And we were talking yesterday real briefly, because I just wanted to be able to use this program and try some things out. So I had asked you about what was your favorite Gunslinger dog, or I think that you had said that this is your favorite production or best production. Is that true?
It's true. Padre is more highly titled and is just an absolutely super dog. But Roman is the first time I line bred on Roland, and I got everything I could have possibly wanted. And my goal now is I have to, make another one. So when he retires, I have something equally as, amazing to trial and train and, live in the house with us. I have a son, Legion, he's a super dog too. He's just very different from Roman. So I have to, it's when you're breeding, and especially when you have, everyone has their goals and everything, but it's finding the right formula. And sometimes you hit it and sometimes you don't, but that's my goal moving forward, is trying to reproduce that.
So how old is Roman now?
He will be 5 in September.
All right. So I just want to go down here. I'm trying to scroll slowly because I don't know how it's coming across on the live feed. But if we look at Roman here, it's a line breeding on Roland. And so,
yeah.
And if we go back, we're talking about that, kind of like the Germans, and you talked about before that 3-2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a 3-2 on Roland.
And here's just some of the dogs that we've been talking about throughout this pedigree. We've been talking about Alaskan Blizzard, who was out of Caleb and I think Bumpkin, Boyd's Country Bumpkin, or maybe it was Graza, something like that. But then you have your Divided Girl, Riza, and these are the dogs that I'm familiar with. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing Pusher now, especially seeing what he's produced and what you've done with him, and from his phenotype, just being interested from a bully standpoint. And so when all this mess gets over and there's more frequent travel and shows, I'll definitely have to get out and check him out. And then, here's the bottom side of the pedigree, but going back to the first dog that you kind of saw and get your dog off, Cool Hand Luke here. And you just look at these pedigrees and it's just full of titled dogs. And, I can't say it enough. It is proven dogs producing the next generation of proven and titled dogs. And that to me is very, very impressive. And so, again, we kind of talked about this, but looking back through the program, what dog has been the most influential?
It's Roland, obviously, has been very influential. I kind of say breedings have been, when I talk about influential on my pedigrees in the program, I usually refer to breedings like the Roland Tally breeding that just, everything clicked. So go down from there. And then the Pumpkin Blizzard breeding, you'll find that pairing at least once in pretty much every pedigree that I have right now, both those pairings. So both of them were just produced insanely nice dogs that I've been able to work with to produce what I have today. So I guess, if you wanted individual dogs, it'd be Roland and Pumpkin, but I think the strength that they add to the pedigrees today were from those specific breedings.
Right. I know you talked about this a little bit earlier, maybe expand slightly more about some mentors that you've had along the way.
I'm not a huge, I kind of do my own thing. I've never had a real, mentor relationship with anyone, but I've had people who I've definitely worked with and have helped me along the way. And most notably would be, Don Matthews. I
Sure.
did that first breeding with him. He's always been very helpful over the years. I bred his dog July twice. Made some really nice puppies with Riza in July. And then let's see, George and Ariel, Bullseye Kennels, they were, very helpful with advice in the beginning. And they actually, I got my River dog. They gave me River when she was a puppy, and she was a very successful weight pull dog. I am not a good weight pull trainer. I don't have the real patience for it. So if you see me doing weight pull with a dog, it just means that dog is exceptionally good at it.
Right.
And she was. So they were very helpful in their advice early on before I started breeding. And then, Alan's always been, real helpful with me along the way. And I learned a whole lot from him in the show ring when I was apprenticing. So those are probably the top 3 or 4 individuals in the breed who've been real instrumental in, giving advice and helping and, letting me use their stud dogs to kind of mold my program.
Any advice for a new person in the breed? Just a tip, anything that you could think of?
Go to shows, see the dogs, pay attention, don't just sit on the internet and, hey, this is the stud dog that everybody's hyping right now. Go see what's going on, talk to people, and be patient. You get your first dog, don't wash it out in the first little bit just because you think it's not going to work out. As I said before, I'm lucky I have the luxury of time and the ability to house numerous dogs. So I can, if I have a dog that I think is going to make it but hasn't shown me yet, I can put it up for a while and then bring it out again. A lot of people don't have the patience to do that. And as I said before, if you breed your really nice dog once and you don't think you got what you want out of the litter, don't wash it out yet. Be patient, try again. And then, on the other side of things, if you want to get into showing or working your dog, put in the effort. Don't show up at a show with a dog that you have never left the property with, never been on a leash. You have to train the dog. You have to be a good handler. You have to be a good trainer also. Just put in the time to prepare the animal for what you want to accomplish with it.
If someone asked you to describe a gunslinger dog, how would you do that, or what would you want them to say?
Intelligent, extremely loyal, plenty of drive, But, you know, Richard and I talk about, you know, the bulldogs that we train, you know, there has to be the ability to think when and drive, you know, so that's what I strive for, is a dog that can get to that high drive state, but also be able to think and listen and be obedient. So, you know, I like them to be biddable. They want to be able to please me. They want to be able to go out and work. And then also just to be structurally beautiful bulldog. So I just like that whole package.
Exactly. And, you know, is kind of wrapping up the questions that we had for you today. Obviously, I think we've been going for now about an hour and 20 minutes. I appreciate you willing to take the time. I know how busy you are. You've revealed to us, you know, kind of what your day is, and we've now taken a chunk of it away from you.
Well, thank you so much
but
for having
by finishing up here, I kind of wanted to have kind of like pro tips. And I mentioned to you before, one thing that I kind of struggle with is raising that working dog. I'm not looking for a high level worker. I'm probably never going to have a dog that goes to a Schutzhund 3. It's not my goal. It's not my priority, but I like to delve in some working events, and I like to enjoy my dogs and do things with them. But I also have kids, and I've had mouthy puppies, draw blood on my kids, and, you know, in the process of chewing up pant legs and just, you know, hanging from arms and everything else. And now my kids are old enough that it's not really a big deal. But how can you raise that puppy without stifling its potential working ability?
It's a challenge and it's a balancing act. You know, I've seen people go to both extremes and it doesn't work either extreme. You know, you can't stomp the puppy for being a puppy, obviously, but you can't just let it get away with bloody murder forever. I usually, you know, you manage it when they're little bitty, you know, not necessarily. I'm going to kind of back up for a minute. You know, some of my best workers have not been mouthy piranha puppies, but sometimes they are. So the ones, you know, sometimes they're such high drive and, you know, just such lunatics like Padre and even Legion, you know, they'd be on the countertops if I let them. You know, it would have taken so much out of them to make them a house dog that it would have been a problem. So sometimes you do have to make that decision. You do have to say, well, you're just going to have to be a crate rotate kennel dog, that kind of thing, turn out in the yard. You're not a house dog. It's just not what you are. And sometimes you get ones that's just going to take a little bit of, you know, working with them. And you do have to get onto them. You just have to be able, and it's very hard. You know, a lot of people can't do it, but you have to gauge the corrections you give them. Because, you know, bulldogs, you know, they get into that drive and they're biting you. And sometimes you have to come down on them kind of hard to stop doing it. And then they're like, oh crap, what did I do? And then you have to build them back up again. But they do have to come to the understanding that you're not a chew toy. And I usually start doing that with more, you know, more pressure once they reach, you know, that 9 or 10 week old point. You know, you just can't be a lunatic. You can buy other stuff, but you can't buy me and you can't bite the kid. And, you know, some puppies, it takes more pressure than others, but you have to be able to gauge how much pressure you can put on them without shutting them down from biting other things. But at the same time, you know, if it's in them to do the work, you know, once you let them mature past that puppy stage and you've broken them of biting everybody and everything, it will come out again. So, you know, you can't just stomp them, but at the same time, you can't let them get away with everything. Because I've seen both sides of people doing that, and neither one of them turn out with a working dog. I mean, it's hard to give an exact formula because each one's different. It's just kind of gauging, you know, how much pressure you need to use without shutting the whole thing down and ruining your relationship with the puppy.
Absolutely. I think that is great advice. And I think whether it's kids, whether it's dogs, you gauge your response to the individual. You don't have the same response for every single dog. They're just different, you know? And so I think that's key to take into, to be thinking about as well. And also something I took from another bulldogger along the way was that, like you said, it's hard to ruin a good dog. And so if a dog is a good dog, it is going to be pretty hard. You're going to have to mess up pretty bad to ruin that dog for future working events and such. And so, like I said, thank you so much. This is a great example of what we're going to do here on the Better Bulldog Bureau. Thank you for stepping up, being the first to go live. I mean, it's, you know, you have to have faith in me that I'm not going to hang you out to dry either. And there is no fear, just nothing but confidence. And there is a ton of evidence why that we went through today. You have an amazing program. I'm happy to recognize you and show Bulldoggers another breeder who's just doing a great job. So thank you and much respect.
Thank you. It was an honor to be here.
All right. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too.
We'll see you. Bye.
Bye, y'all.